We will now welcome our Peace and Solidarity Commission and its subcommittees to present on the ongoing struggles being waged around the world and the role that we as the Communist Party of the United States can play in these international struggles. Please welcome our first speaker from the Peace and Solidarity Commission, Comrade Henry Lohendorf. Henry Lohendorf has been a peace activist since joining the movement to end the war on Vietnam since the 1960s. He was selected to chair the newly revitalized Peace and Solidarity Commission of the party in 2020. He also chairs the Greater New Haven, Connecticut Peace Council and is a member of the Executive Board and Secretariat of the U.S. Peace Council. In 2020, he helped coordinate the efforts that led to New Haven voters overwhelmingly passing a ballot referendum calling for our government to move money from the military to our community's human needs. He continues working the local peace coalitions throughout the country to promote the national Move the Money campaign that grew out of that referendum. Henry helped found and participated in the Legislative Commission on Connecticut's Future, aimed to examine how to convert Connecticut's war industry to peacetime green manufacturing while ensuring that the workers retain decent manufacturing and other jobs aside from making killing machines. In 2016, he led a fact-finding delegation to Syria to break the silence of the peace movement over the U.S. weaponized war on that country. He participates in both the national and international No Foreign Military Bases Coalition and conferences to close the more than 800 U.S. foreign military bases that threaten the planet. Comrade Henry Lohendorf, you have the floor.
Thank you. I'm really pleased to be part of this important conference. What wonderful presentations we've seen. We've heard a sharp critique of imperialism from a widespread group of singers and speakers. It's quite impressive. As you know, we live in an era of extreme danger to humankind and the existence to life on this planet. The two existential threats to humanity, scorching of the planet and nuclear war, are not only being poorly confronted, but worse, are being exacerbated by the ruling class, primarily of our country. A lot of the threats to us, to our survival, are being hidden or heavily distorted. In the last 75 years, the United States invaded one country after another, leading to the devastation of those countries and their people, resulting in many dead and seriously wounded young Americans, not to mention the targeted peoples, in particular in Korea and Vietnam. Family and friends of the casualties, along with many others, began to take action to oppose these and subsequent wars. Public demonstrations and other political actions threatened to derail the goals of US imperialism, namely the project to totally dominate the world by military, financial, political, and cultural means. Totally dominate the world, or in the words of imperialism itself, full spectrum dominance. To circumvent internal popular resistance to wars for total dominance, the US political leaders are provoking wars that don't directly involve US troops dying on the one hand and imposing economic wars on the other. That is what our country is doing. Two most recent examples of generating shooting wars are, one, evolving grave threats to Russia by surrounding it with US and NATO military forces, threats that successfully provoked Russia to invade Ukraine, leading to massive death and destruction, war without sending in US troops. The second example, the US has for a long time encircled China with military bases. It has weaponized human rights against China. It has imposed trade sanctions. The US is building new military alliances against China and recently led multilateral war exercises in the Pacific aimed at threatening China. In the last few weeks, the US has intentionally provoked China by directly assaulting the globally accepted one China policy that recognizes that Taiwan is part of China. These policies are aimed at building a wall around China to restrict its ability to develop its society and economy. Attacking the one China is aimed at generating a devastating civil war within China. A major goal of US imperialism is to weaken targeted nations economically, or to prevent them from playing a significant role on the world stage. In the case of China, the goal is to prevent it from becoming a wealthy, developed socialist society. Selling US-made weapons and US-owned fossil fuels at great profit is a corollary goal. Constructing vastly profitable imperialistic wars without the backlash generated from US troops dying accelerated after the US military and political defeat in Vietnam in the 1970s. Such sanitary wars have predecessors in the wars of the 1980s, Iraq-Iran, the Nicaraguan Contra War, the Afghanistan War, and of course, the earlier Bay of Pigs attack on Cuba in 1961. The US takes a second approach to global dominance that our own people largely don't notice. Its form is the deadly sanctions the government applies on countries that insist on finding their own path to the future without US monopoly corporations controlling them. Cuba, Venezuela, North Korea, Syria, Iran, Nicaragua, and China are among the nearly 40 countries subject to US such sanctions. In every scenario, the US government and its allies in the corporate media have mobilized massive propaganda and censorship machinery to deceive and numb the public from seeing the war crimes our country is carrying out. The Peace and Solidarity Commission was recreated by the Communist Party USA's 2019 convention to counter this warmongering in all of its forms, to explore, evaluate, and educate around peace issues, and to energize members of the party and the broader public into taking collective action. As you will hear, the Commission initiates statements, articles, and webinars, and we collaborate closely with our international department. During the pandemic, the Peace and Solidarity Commission evolved subcommittees focused on different geographical regions, Asia, Africa, the Americas, the Middle East, to focus and make our work more effective. Following my presentation, you will hear some results of the work of these subcommittees. Beyond education, the second part, and most important work of the Peace and Solidarity Commission consists in helping the party build the broadest possible peace movement in our country. We recognize the important meaning of the phrase, all politics is local. Collective local activity is essential for the growth of the national peace movement. Party members are urged to join or create local peace organizations and coalitions to demand peace and social justice that our increasingly militarized society fails to address. For example, broad coalitions around the country have been developed to cut the huge $1 trillion a year military budget that now smothers the civilian economy by vacuuming up vast resources. These coalitions have succeeded in mobilizing city councils to pass resolutions demanding Congress move money away from the war budget and redirect it into a just transition to jobs with living wages, producing sustainable energy, ensuring housing, healthcare, education, food security, and so on. Such coalitions have succeeded in a number of smaller cities throughout the country and are now working in major cities, including New York, Pittsburgh, and Denver. Members of our party are encouraged to work in such move the money coalitions. Members are also urged to join solidarity coalitions that generate actions with the people of nations hounded by toxic US policies. One example of local solidarity organizing just took place this weekend in Connecticut, where I live. In the last 2 years, in response to recommendations of the National Network on Cuba, resolutions were passed by the city councils of Hartford, the capital, and New Haven, calling on our federal government to end the 60-year-old illegal blockade of Cuba. They joined some 40 such resolutions in legislative and other bodies across the nation. Based on Connecticut's resolutions, a statewide coalition formed to bring the Cuban ambassador to the United Nations to visit Connecticut. His visit, just concluded, is already stimulating further actions to pressure our government to normalize relations with our neighbor to the south. To build a successful peace and solidarity movement in the US requires working with and mobilizing the rainbow array of people and organizations in our communities. As is evident, we've come a long way, and is also evident we still have a very long way to go. Through both education and action, we build the peace movement and we build the party. I now have the privilege of introducing our next speaker, Duncan McFarland, the chair of the Asia Pacific subcommittee of our Peace and Solidarity Commission. He's been an anti-war and peace activist since the 1960s, which started his interest in Vietnam and China. Duncan was active with United for Justice with Peace, the Boston area affiliate of the National United for Peace and Justice, which organized major national protest demonstrations opposing the war and occupation of Iraq during 2002 to 2007. He works with the Boston Chinatown on friendship with Boston Chinatown on friendship projects, and edited what is really an excellent book entitled A China Reader, published last year in 2021 by Changemaker Press. Duncan, the camera is yours.
Thank you, Henry, for your kind introduction. The Asia Pacific Subcommittee formed about 1.5 years ago when some members of the Peace and Solidarity Commission formed the China Subcommittee for both education and action. Since then, our work has expanded to include Vietnam, Australia, and Laos. The global economic and strategic significance of the Asia Pacific region will only grow in coming years, as containing China is now explicitly the long-term #1 goal of US imperialism. These are critical issues in our times. We must oppose a new Cold War and oppose increasing racism at home against Asians, Chinese, and other people of color. The subcommittee organized successful webinars on poverty alleviation in China and Vietnam's path to socialism, with speakers from both those countries, and a clip of those was just shown. We presented on a panel organized by the CP Australia opposing the AUKUS military agreement. Our meetings got firsthand reports from Beijing, Hanoi, and Vientiane, and updates on work visas and student exchanges. We have participated in Zoom webinars on Marxist topics hosted by the International Department of the Communist Party of China. Meetings were devoted to discussion of the CPC 6th Plenary 100 Years History document and Vietnam General Secretary Truong's important speech on the achievements and challenges of socialism in Vietnam. We invite people to join us in our activities. Specifically, we'll be hosting a discussion of China's 20th Party Congress upon its conclusion later this fall. This is a very important meeting for understanding Chinese politics. We are also scheduling a webinar on Vietnam's foreign policy and international relations. And so we encourage people to go to Red World Review /signup and sign up for these events. Again, we call on conference participants to join in peace and solidarity work, oppose imperialism, and help strengthen the US peace movement. And now I'd like to introduce 3 members of the Asia Pacific Subcommittee who can talk about our work. And first, I'd like to introduce Emily from Beijing. Emily is a member of the Virginia District and Asia Pacific Subcommittee. Currently, she is working on a postdoc in Beijing. Her talk is entitled, A Chinese American Comrade's Journey to CPUSA and International Solidarity. Emily?
Hi, comrades. I'm a second-generation Chinese American. I spent much of my childhood in China, experiencing firsthand one of the most successful socialist projects, which many of our comrades has covered, and I'll not repeat for the sake of time. Instead, I'll be sharing a personal story. After I came back to the US, I find myself struggling a lot with the reconciliation between the society and the many aspects of my identity as a Chinese American, a queer woman, and so on. And for many years, the two aspects that were usually overlooked or silenced, sometimes by myself, were my identity as a Chinese and a communist for fear of rejection and enmity. It was in 2020, amidst the height of xenophobia, that I discovered CPUSA. I saw that the party stood firmly against racism and hatred, and that it not only supports, but also learns from socialist countries of today, such as the Chinese experience. I realized that this is the leftist space where my beliefs and my identity are no longer liabilities, but are valued and have purposes. So that's why I'm here. Right now, I'm working in Beijing, reconnecting with my heritage and providing fresh looks of China's progress on the ground with my advantage in the language and culture. Comrades, we're now at a critical point of history with the new Cold War and danger of actual war. Our ruling class is making desperate moves on the Taiwan Strait in order to preserve their profit. They've tried their hands on Tibet, Hong Kong, and Xinjiang and failed. And now they're willing to pull us into more calamities and risk the lives of the people, especially people of color, as anti-Asian violence has increased for several-fold in recent years. There's so much indoctrination and ignorance that we need to overcome, and we must use every ounce of our working class experience and knowledge to combat the ruling class's schemes and lies. So to all of my comrades, especially comrades of color, you have a voice in the CPUSA. Your experience and knowledge are invaluable. The working people of the world needs you more than ever. So join the peace movement, and we look forward to meet you in this struggle. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emily. And now I would like to introduce Amiad from Hanoi. Amiad is a member of the International Department and chair of its publications subcommittee. He has lived in Hanoi for nearly 10 years. He regularly reports on Vietnam for the People's World and is active in Vietnam solidarity work. He will speak on the comradely history between Communist Party USA and the Communist Party of Vietnam. Amiad?
Thank you, Duncan. The fraternal and comradely history of the relationship between the Communist Party USA and the Communist Party of Vietnam is a long and storied one. From Vietnam's early fight for independence through the horrific days of the American imperialist war in Vietnam through to today, CPUSA has always stood side by side with our comrades in Vietnam, putting our internationalist ideals into action. During the war in the US, the party helped organize anti-war protests and organize the youth against the war through party-led W.E.B. Du Bois clubs. CPUSA also tried to rally support around people who refused to be drafted, such as with the Fort Hood 3. On the international front, CPUSA General Secretary Gus Hall, CPUSA Vice Presidential candidate Jarvis Tyner, and other party leaders went to North Vietnam in support of the anti-war movement in an act of solidarity with our Vietnamese comrades. They returned to the US and made sure the American public was aware of the horrific crimes being committed against the Vietnamese people in the name of imperialism that they had witnessed firsthand. After the war, during the long imperialist embargo of Vietnam, CPUSA were among the loudest proponents of lifting the inhumane blockade. Today, the Asia Pacific Subcommittee of the Peace and Solidarity Commission continues to foster the long relationship between our two parties. Through educational webinars, publishing articles, we work to help Americans learn the truth about the life in Vietnam, Vietnam's successes on the roads to building socialism, and to see through the neo-McCarthyist, anti-communist lies spread in the West. I know that for myself, and I'm confident the same is true for all the members of our subcommittee. I am extremely proud to be able to continue the long tradition of internationalism and anti-imperialism shared by the CPUSA and the Communist Party of Vietnam. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amiyad. And now I'd like to introduce another member of our subcommittee, Callum. Callum is a member of the District Committee of the Communist Party of Eastern Pennsylvania and Delaware, and is active in the No More War Peace Coalition in Philadelphia. Callum has recently been accepted into East China Normal University in Shanghai to study for a master's degree in political theory. Callum will talk about the importance of internationalism to young Americans. Callum?
Yeah, so I mean, internationalism, I would say, is extremely important to young Americans, even if most aren't aware of it, simply because for as long as people of my generation have really been alive on this earth, our country has been at war or off on some military adventure, since we've been alive. And that is directly related to our struggles here, when we are struggling to get student debt relief or, for education or healthcare, we're told that, the funds for these initiatives simply do not exist. At the same time, while we've been alive, there's been horrendous military adventures across the earth. And of course, that's where all the money is really going. And secondly, really, is that young Americans today cannot count on the same standard of living that the union way of life provided for our parents. I mean, I'm sure many young people here have heard that, some, adult, telling them when they were younger that, when I was your age, I had this, that, and that, I can do this, that, and that. Well, that simply does not exist for our generation anymore. We are burdened with debt, and we have a lot of struggles ahead of us. And so it's really no wonder that this generation has probably the most favorable opinion of socialism, at least ever recorded. And probably the biggest reason why Americans are growing more favorable socialism and why having a more favorable interest in internationalism is that we're poised to inherit a planet whose future is very uncertain. Climate change and the degradation of the environment, is not, it's for real. And despite what a lot of Republican pundits are saying, it threatens life on this planet. And so working hand in hand together with other young people and environmental activists and comrades from across the world is important, for the survival of our generation and the survival of the planet. And also in regards to the work of the subcommittee, I feel it's been extremely rewarding because at least for me, it's give me the drive to pursue an education abroad, something that I probably would not have considered if I had not seriously become more engaged in internationalism. For example, like working on that webinar on poverty alleviation was one of the, it was a very proud moment of my life and kind of gave me the drive to, believe I can do this. And that's the same, for everyone else in the subcommittee. Nearly everyone, is seeking education abroad or working abroad, putting, internationalist, principles into practice. So, yeah, that's it for me. I just want to say thank you again, Duncan, for the introduction, and thank you for all the comrades for both at home and abroad for making this possible.
Thank you, comrades, for your presentations. Remember, Q&A, send your questions in through this presentation. We'll answer them after the end of the Peace and Solidarity Commission's presentations have concluded. Our next presentations will be by the Americas Subcommittee. Before we continue, it's the perfect time to mention that we are now about $100 away from reaching our $2,000 fundraising goal for Cuban Solidarity to send medical equipment to the National Network on Cuba's Saving Lives campaign. Log on to redworldreview.org/sign up to donate and help us reach our goal before the conclusion of this conference today. Next up is the Americas Subcommittee with a presentation by Andres on socialist and social democratic governments challenging U.S. hegemony in the Americas. Andres Jimenez Montoya is a co-facilitator of the CPUSA Peace and Solidarity Commission's Americas Subcommittee, co-chair of the Ethnic Diversity Committee for the California Federation of Teachers, co-coordinator of the International Association of Mexican and Greater Mexico Studies, and a member of the editorial committee of the Revista de la Universidad de La Habana in Havana, Cuba. Jimenez also serves as president and CEO of Americas, an international solidarity action nonprofit organization. Jimenez participated in the 11th contingent of the Cuban Solidarity Organization, Venezolanos Brigade in 1978. He has worked as a journalist, community organizer, socialist activist, advocate, and a local appointed official in the San Francisco East Bay region. Comrade, you have the floor.
Thank you so very much. I am reporting to you today from Mexico City. I'm in the middle of some meetings, some of which are related exactly to international solidarity, including with our comrades here in Mexico City from the Cuban embassy. We face the subcommittee on the Americas was just created in the last year. We're getting off the ground in terms of doing a number of activities, but we don't want to get in the way of existing successful efforts. And we've built quite a few in the United States of solidarity with countries and movements and the peoples of the Americas. Of course, the work, the National Network on Cuba is doing very important work right now, particularly in the area of supporting the fundraising to be able to deliver important medical equipment as well as provide other necessities for life, given the stranglehold of the U.S. economic during the Trump administration. What I want to do is name because, and where we plan to go as an Americas committee and invite the participation of all of those who are present today at this very important first meeting, first international conference. You know, we do face a new set of strategic, economic, and political conditions in the Americas. In fact, this section we titled The Rise of Social, that present develop a strategy for international solidarity and anti-imperialism. The first is to take a look at the fact that the political realities are changing in the Americas. Because of mass movements in countries like Chile and in Colombia, Peru and Bolivia, and throughout the region, we've seen the rise of governments representing low working class people, low and moderate income people, trying to achieve a better life, and a better life by having activist governments that play a role on behalf of the working class, working with the labor movement and with peasant movements and with indigenous peoples throughout the Americas. I think we can follow the lead of those governments in challenging U.S. attempts to put a brake on reforms, radical reforms in the Americas. I think we can also build on the longstanding solidarity groups, the longstanding work of solidarity groups in the United States that have been working with a number of these popular movements in the Americas for over half a century. And I think, as I will get into in a bit, these governments and the popular organizations supporting them are helping to point the way of our own understanding of where we can limit and where we can prevent further intervention by the United States in the self-determination of the Americas. And finally, I think we also need to understand that the working class in the United States is composed of an ever larger number of peoples from south of the Rio Grande or the Caribbean. Because of, in fact, as we see our own working class, we can see a working class that's much more from Latin America and the Caribbean. And that works hand in glove with the solidarity work, because our own labor organizations, our own popular organizations, our own solidarity organizations include the participation of people whose ancestry is in the very countries of all of the Americas, and particularly in Mexico, given the large number, over 45 million people of Mexican origin in the United States, with another 20 million from other countries. I want to return to some of the points that I just introduced. One is we're seeing a rise and return of socialist and social democratic governments in the Americas, in addition to Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. And we also are seeing the leadership of countries like Mexico, which had a change in government and a change in regime, really, with the 2018 election in which 53% of Mexican voters voted for the current president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador. Mexico has assumed recently the leadership of the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, CELAC, and as part of that work and as part of its international diplomatic efforts, Mexico is actually proposing the dismantling of the Organization of American States and the creation of another entity that would be something more like an America's Union, based loosely on the European Union. But the real important piece of that is that Mexico believes that U.S. hegemony no longer fits the current realities in the Americas. And specifically, the Mexican president has argued for the importance of ending the economic blockade of Cuba, and including Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua in all international meetings of the Americas. And for that reason, the president of Mexico did not attend the recent Conference of the Americas in Los Angeles, because of the fact that Cuba and Venezuela were not included, nor Nicaragua, as part of that meeting. But we can also see, aside from Mexico, the emergence of social democratic and socialist governments in Argentina, Bolivia, Peru, Honduras, Chile, recently Colombia. And it looks very much that in Brazil, there will be a return of President Lula to the presidency. And we should also not forget, as we consider the situation of the Americas, the ongoing colonial crisis of Puerto Rico, and the importance of Puerto Rico for the United States, and the importance of popular movements in Puerto Rico in response to current challenges and the corruption of many of the vested interests in Puerto Rico aligned with U.S. imperialism. And a final point in terms of the circumstances of the Americas, we see that beginning with the Trump administration in particular, a particular hardening of the economic blockade against Cuba, as well as similar sanctions pressed against Venezuela and Nicaragua as well. And we find that the solidarity groups in the United States have played significant roles in maintaining ongoing support for the popular movements and socialist movements of the Americas. So finally, let me just say that we're taking up a challenge of solidarity work in a changed environment that's beginning to limit U.S. power in the Americas. And we need to ally ourselves with these progressive and self-determination movements in the Americas as a way of challenging imperialism and creating the kind of social justice and equity that we seek throughout the Americas. And finally, we see a new and added aggressivity against solidarity movements in the United States, and particularly recently when it comes to solidarity with Cuba, with the FBI investigation of Puentes de Amor, and with solidarity groups in Puerto Rico, solidarity groups with Cuba and Puerto Rico. We need to be vigilant, and we need to work together. And we are confident that with the allies and the anti-imperialist movement, we will be able to achieve a full solidarity with the popular movements of Latin America. Thank you very much.
Well, Andres, we appreciate your presentation, and we also are happy to inform you that we have hit our $2,000 goal for Cuban Solidarity. Thank you to comrades all around the world that have helped contribute to that. Any excess donations will also still go to the NNOC. Next up is the Middle East Subcommittee with the presentation given by Lucy on a recent delegation to Palestine. First, we'll play a cultural video submitted by Comrade Lucy herself.
I want to thank Dylan for inviting me to present this song, which was written by my friend Matt Jones of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, Freedom Singers. He wrote it after he was in the Freedom Singers, but that is his legacy. The song is entitled Palestine, and I would appreciate you listening to it. Thank you. If you think of the Middle East in this modern time, you can't help but say the word Palestine. People there have lost their land. Some have lost their home. They live in other countries. Their freedom almost gone. Palestine needs her freedom. Palestine needs our love. Palestine needs her freedom. Palestine needs our love. There seems to be no answer to give us the reason why people cannot live, so no one has to die. We've got to take a stand for freedom, take a stand for truth, take a stand for justice. That's what we've got to do, 'cause Palestine needs her freedom. Palestine needs our love. Palestine needs her freedom. Palestine needs our love. Fighting for their freedom, fighting for their land, fighting for their children. Let's help them take a stand. Palestine needs her freedom. Palestine needs our love. Palestine needs her freedom. Palestine needs our love. People of all countries, of every race and creed, we need a new beginning. Let us plant the seed. Plant the seed of love. Let that love seed grow. Plant the seed for everyone, so all the world will know that Palestine needs her freedom. Palestine needs our love. Palestine needs her freedom. Palestine needs our love. Palestine needs her freedom. Palestine needs our love. Palestine needs her freedom. Palestine needs our love.
Thank you for your participation, Comrade Lucy. The floor is now yours.
Dylan, I want to thank you for that wonderful slideshow which accompanied the song. One cannot speak of Palestine and overlook Gaza. I was not able to visit Gaza on my recent trip in June and July. However, the recent attacks on Gaza following Joe Biden's visit to Israel have been shown to everyone in the world. In the US media, Palestinian Arabs are called terrorists, and Israeli Jews are the beleaguered allies of the US. However, the Israeli violence against preschool children and their mothers cannot be characterized as a battle the way National Public Radio has done. It is a massacre. I ask you to write to NPR and other news outlets to correct their descriptions of what is being done to the Palestinians with the military aid from the US government to the State of Israel. I also ask you to write to 3 people, your favorite state rep, your favorite US congressperson, and your favorite US senator to oppose the legislation which criminalizes any criticism of the State of Israel and legislation which blocks the transmission of resources to humanitarian organizations which provide educational and health services to Palestinians. On shared screen, I direct your attention to Palestine Legal while I share my reflections on a recent trip. And to those who have been falsely accused of anti-Semitism, take a look at the book, Reclaiming Judaism from Zionism, edited by Professor Carolyn Carche. The book is a collection of short biographies of Jewish people from many walks of life who have come to see the Palestinians as human beings. Although I have known the Palestinian story of massacre, dislocation, and invisibilization for many years, there is nothing like travel to a place and seeing the place with my own eyes and meeting the people there who have survived. In the 60s, I attended high school with Zionists who taught me about the land without a people for the people without a land, and other lies. It was not until after I graduated high school and then met college students in the 70s from other countries like South Africa, Iran, and Algeria that I learned the truth about Palestine. There is value in reading and listening to people tell their stories, but there is nothing like seeing with my own eyes. Traveling to the country and seeing for myself made certain things stand out in my mind. What stood out on my recent visit was the rootedness of this people, their long-standing connection to the land, connection to family, connection to neighbors. This is something that has been destroyed in the United States. In the territory which became the United States, the people who understood the connection to the land and the connection to each other were condemned as savages and massacred. To these indigenous people, the idea of buying and selling land was unconscionable. But so-called Christians from Europe changed all of that. The land was transformed from earth mother to commodity, and money was valued more than people. In the society which they have created on the land that they seized, elders are abandoned until they die, and then their descendants are pitted against each other as they grasp pieces of a crumbling ancestral inheritance. Neighbors are pitted against each other in a contest for prestige. The lies that justify the capitalist system have been told so often that we believe them. We live our lives in obedience to the lies, paying rents and mortgages to the system which stole the land. In Palestine, the connections are still recognized and felt by the Palestinians. Their connections are more real than the lies and the abuses of the Israeli government. In high school, I hung out with students whose father raised money to plant invasive species trees in Palestine. I was told that those trees were planted to make the desert bloom. When I visited Palestine, I learned that those trees were used to cover the land where more than 400 Palestinian villages once stood. Those villages have been massacred, the survivors driven into exile, and their homes destroyed. The olive trees which the Palestinians had planted centuries ago were uprooted. Trees familiar to the invaders were planted. The Zionists say that they came to a desert and made it bloom. But olives do not grow in the desert. The scientific evidence that olives have been cultivated in Palestine for millennia counters the lie of a land without people and the lie about it being a desert. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. If we continue to allow our U.S. tax dollars to support the criminal activity of the Israeli government, the effects of those crimes will visit us. Some of us who are Black are already suffering from the same abuses, dislocation and invisibilization. I thank you for your attention.
Lucy, thank you again so much for your presentation and your performance. Your contributions are very much appreciated. Our next subcommittee will be a presentation from the Africa Subcommittee with a presentation by Karamo Solomon. Solomon joined the CPUSA in December 1989 during the Henry Winston campaign. He was interviewed by the Elsie Dickinson Chair of the CPEPA in Delaware District and Beth Elderman, who served as district committee person until her recent death. Lou Incognito noticed him as potential Communist Party leader and helped him abroad the district committee. Up until then, he had served as the club treasurer of the Northeast Club. Recently, the district elected him to chair of the Communist Party of Eastern Pennsylvania and Delaware. He has written several articles for the People's World, and he is currently serving as acting chair of the African Subcommittee of the Peace and Solidarity Commission of the CPUSA, substituting for Gary Hicks, who is ill. Comrade, you have the floor.
Thank you, comrades. Africa is in the serious throes of economic exploitation because of imperialism, neocolonialism, wars, and poverty. Capitalist exploitation and expansion is the reason for Africa's maladies. From the Sahel region down to the Cape of Good Hope, Africa's resources are literally being stolen. In Niger, Mali, Nigeria, oil, uranium, and gold are being taken. Rich mineral deposits of diamond are being removed from the soil, and not one drop of the profits are in the hands of the African peoples. In the Sudan, the struggle is over the border between the North and the South. In Ghana, complaints about U.S. military bases being allowed in the country. In Kenya, cries of election fraud are raised by Mr. Odinga against Mr. Ruto, who up until the time of the election was trailing in the polls. In Tigray, a war rages between forces in Tigray and Ethiopia and Eritrea. A war with massive rapes, killings, and genocidal attacks by both sides. One woman reporter was distraught by not only the sexual assaults and murders, but by the oppression, seizure of documents, and raids upon her office. In South Africa, the former president, Jacob Zuma, is being tried for corruption and bribery. In South Africa, the ANC is facing a difficult challenge in the election because of the charges of corruption. However, these challenges have been a result of the ongoing racist attacks by the Democratic Alliance on the Tripartite Alliance. This has resulted in a movement for secession from South Africa of the Cape region. This is a fragmentation movement sought by the ultra-right capitalists in one of the nation's richest areas. The cruelty and racism of the capitalists and the desire for a neo-apartheid movement is a sad tragedy of capitalist exploitation and imperialism. They hope to maintain a separation of the races, not by segregation laws within the nation, but by the separation of two nations, one predominantly white and rich, the other Black and poor. This is not a dream of freedom, but a nightmare of oppression. Niger, though rich in history, is one of the poorest nations in the world. The incomes in Niger are low. The GDP of Niger is 13.69 billion. The per capita income for 2022 is $565 United States. The average salary in Niger is 414 United States dollars. 40% of the GDP of Niger is derived from agriculture. Niger, according to Wikipedia, has consistently been ranked at the bottom of the Human Development Index at 0.394 as of 2019. It ranks among the least developed and the most heavily indebted nations in the world. According to the World Bank and International Monetary Fund, the COVID-19 pandemic continues to have a significant impact on Niger households, almost all of which have suffered from the economic slowdown. It is important for the government to be able to reallocate resources from general administration to social services and infrastructure in order to maximize growth opportunities and social welfare. However, despite the poor income, Niger is one of the largest producers of uranium in the world. France began mining of uranium in Niger in the 1970s to take advantage of the rich deposits and the potential of enormous profits. Today, it is the nation's largest export, while the French-owned uranium mining company has become rich and profitable. The country's economy has been stripped and looted because the nation's richest resources has been taken for little or no cost. Niger is also an oil-producing nation. In the Tatuma oil field in Madam, oil was discovered during its independence era. Exxon and Texaco found oil in 1980 in the Agadem Basin. Food insecurity and unemployment remain a severe problem in Nigeria, and this problem, coupled with extreme poverty, has been even more aggravated by security issues that have increased because of Al-Qaeda and other rebel and reactionary groups who have driven thousands of refugees from Nigeria and other neighboring countries in the Sahel region. This is a small problem compared to the growing problem of pollution and ecological damage that has been brought on by the uranium mining industry. According to Greenpeace, an environmental activist organization, the soil surrounding the mining area has not only become polluted with toxic chemicals, but with radioactive materials. These radioactive materials threaten the life and health of the surrounding community. In the drinking water and the soil, Greenpeace activists found levels of radon that far exceeded the recommended levels prescribed by the World Health Organization. In November 2020, the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Abiy Ahmed, sends troops in the southern Tigray in response to an attack on an Ethiopian military base. The attacks on Ethiopian forces were a result of the postponement of the scheduled parliamentary elections because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Eritrea, in alliance with Ethiopia, would begin its assault from the north. During the first phase of the war, the capital of Tigray was captured by the allied forces of Eritrea and Ethiopia. During the struggle, the capital was recaptured, and a long and very violent struggle began between the two forces. During this struggle, Tigray's People's Liberation Front joined forces with the Moro Liberation Army. Together, they threatened to march on to Addis Ababa and overthrow the prime minister and his government. The war escalated, and during the war, many atrocities occurred. Both sides practiced a form of war rape. Soldiers would publicly rape women whose ages would range from 8 to 72 years of age. These rapes would often occur in front of their families. Because of the ensuing violence, food, water, and electricity were cut off, causing malnutrition of children, disease, and death. After the Middle Passage, the world has accepted this as normal. Racism is often acceptable because of slavery. We owe it to ourselves to say we are owed more. We are human. Black or white, an atrocity is an atrocity. In addition, we need to stand up and beg that the forces doing the fighting have to understand who they are and what their names mean. Tigray Liberation People's Front means it is the Liberation People's Front. A Moro Liberation Army means it is an army for the liberation of humanity. The Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Front, the liberation group that once comprised all these forces, means revolutionary democratic, not just for Tigray, Ethiopia, Eritrea, but liberation for the entire people of Africa and the entire world. This is what Che Guevara, Fidel Castro, Nelson Mandela, Kwame Nkrumah, Sekou Touré, and W.E.B. Du Bois would have understood. This is what I believe they, if they were still alive, would have demanded. Thank you, comrades.
Thank you to all the comrades from the Peace and Solidarity Commission for your presentations. We'll now be opening the floor to questions and discussion from the audience. We will try to get at least one question per committee. The first question we're going to take is from our Zoom Q&A, and this is to Amiad or Duncan. This audience member wants to know, could you please talk about the struggle of the Vietnamese people for justice for Agent Orange victims?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So for those that are aware, Agent Orange was a defoliant. Basically, it was basically a chemical weapon that was marketed as something else that the U.S. used during the war, and it has stayed in the bloodlines and in the soil of people, and it now has affected 3 generations of people with horrible side effects of deformities and diseases and illnesses, cancer. The U.S. over the years has pledged to help, and while the U.S. has helped with the environmental cleanup, they have never helped any of the victims. And worse yet, the companies like Monsanto and Dow Chemical that made these chemicals are protected by the U.S. courts and have never been held accountable. Just a couple weeks ago marked the 61st anniversary of when Agent Orange was first dropped on Vietnam. There are lots of programs here in Vietnam where the main one being Vietnamese Association of Victims of Agent Orange that builds homes and takes care of the victims and gives care to the victims of now 3 generations forward. There's also a lot of Americans that handled the chemicals during the war that are also victims and have also, while received some compensation, not much. So it's an ongoing struggle that needs attention. Every year, Barbara Lee of California tries to submit legislation to get the American government to take responsibility for this history, but every year it fails. And more people need to be aware, and more people need to rally around this important cause.
Thank you so much, Amiad. The next question we have is for Andres. This question is, can you expand on the way Mexico's Morena movement built towards electoral success?
Yes, I think I got it going again, right? I'm having a little bit of a connection problem. But in fact, Morena represents the evolution of the left in Mexico from the point of the 1988 election, where the figurehead of the left was Cuauhtémoc Cárdenas, who was the son of a famous populist president of the 30s in Mexico. And there was an electoral coalition that developed within what was then the center-left party, the party of the Democratic Revolution, that involved community organizers and unions and others, and led to the successful campaigns of Cuauhtémoc Cárdenas to be mayor of Mexico City, followed by AMLO, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, the current president, and then who was followed by Marcelo Ebrard, who was also mayor of Mexico City and is now the foreign minister and now an active part of Morena. So there had been a political evolution where you had a number of elected officials from the center-left party, a number of community groups coalescing around the demand that politics of usual end. And the first campaign, Morena ran for the presidency was in 2018, when Andrés Manuel López Obrador for the third time ran for president. And that presidential campaign served as a galvanizing force for those who are part of the electoral coalition in Morena. And it's still a coalition in formation. But it looks, the Morena now has the governorships of more than half of Mexico's states and federal entities, about 17 of them now, of the 31 entities in Mexico, with the possibility that this year, they'll pick up another 2. But there's an evolving social movement behind building Morena as a party, and it's still very much in the early stages. And like with many countries, the definition of the left in Mexico is a little bit more fluid and flexible. And there's not, while there are traditional parties of the left, there seems to be a consensus in developing a popular movement around issues that are normally supported by democratic socialists and socialist democrats. I think that the next presidential election looks very good, that Morena will again win the presidency. And I've neglected to mention that they have a voting majority in both houses of the Mexican Congress. So I think Mexico's government is going to play an increasingly important role as an ally to other countries of the Americas that are fighting U.S. intervention in the internal affairs of Latin American countries, and arguing for a unity of all Latin American governments, not excluding anyone, and clearly including Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. Thank you.
Thank you, Andres. The next question is for Lucy. Lucy, what allies in the region do the liberation fighters of Palestine have?
Wow. That's an excellent question for which I do not have an answer. So if the person would like to send the question to you, I will research the answer.
Okay, that sounds good. We'll move to Karamo, the African Subcommittee. What is the progress of the resistance to French imperialism in Niger and Mali?
I think the real thing that they found, and this is the real tragedy of it, is that there has been a complaint about the French government, that they have been, in fact, assisting and actually doing things in benefit for the terrorists. I guess this is a product of imperialists' way of gaining control of the organization and using the violence that is, of course, terrorizing the people to continue to ensure that their pockets remain full. It also gives the French military and NATO an added advantage to those countries' disadvantage. And the bases become, instead of ways of protecting people, they become bases for not only just neocolonialism, but a base for imperialism and oppression. What can be done in response to this? There have been popular outcries for the discontinuation of bases and the building of bases in the United States, military bases that have been built for the US and for French. The discontinuation of NATO assistance and presence in Africa, and the strengthening of OAU and the countries of the region so that they can adequately provide for their own defense, and also the breaking away of imperialism, control of their own region's resources. And once they can get the capital from that and the strengthening of their own military forces, I think that will more than adequately assist them in getting rid of the region's terrorism. Thank you.